The city streets hummed with the usual rush of life, but on this cold evening, one figure stood out. Elon Musk, dressed in casual clothes, walked anonymously among the crowd. His usual high-profile presence was hidden in plain sight. He didn't mind blending in, it was easier this way. But as he walked past the towering buildings and crowded sidewalks, something caught his attention. There, on the corner of a busy street, a young girl sat alone. Her clothes were ragged, her face pale, and her eyes empty. She clutched a small, empty food container, her shoulders hunched against the cold. She didn't beg, she didn't make eye contact with anyone. People walked by her as if she were invisible, their faces focused on their phones, their lives, their own problems. But Elon couldn't ignore her. There was something about her, something that made him stop in his tracks. He wasn't one to stop for strangers, but the girl's presence felt like a magnet pulling at his attention. He watched as the world around her continued on, and she remained untouched. His heart stirred with a strange sense of urgency. He couldn't understand why, but he felt compelled to help. Stepping closer, he bent down, making sure to keep his presence low-key. "Are you hungry?" he asked gently, his voice barely above a whisper. The girl barely reacted at first, as if the question hadn't registered. But then, she slowly lifted her head. Her eyes met his, and something in her expression stopped him cold. Elon had met countless people in his life, but the emptiness in her eyes was something he had rarely seen. It was as if she had been robbed of everything, hope, joy, even the will to live. For a moment, it felt like the entire city faded into the background, and there was only the two of them, standing in this shared moment. She didn't speak at first, but after a long, hesitant silence, she finally nodded. Her lips trembled as she said, "I haven't eaten all day." Her voice was weak, but there was a hint of something else in it, a spark of defiance, perhaps, or a longing for something she had lost. Elon paused. He had asked the question out of instinct, expecting a simple yes or no, but there was more to this moment than he could have anticipated. Something in her words, her quiet, matter-of-fact delivery, struck him hard. A hunger for food was one thing, but the emptiness in her voice made it clear that this girl wasn't just starving for food. She was starving for something deeper. Without hesitation, Elon reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He quickly tapped a few commands, and within minutes, a food delivery service confirmed his order. As he waited for the food to arrive, he kept his eyes on the girl. She hadn't moved much, still sitting in the same hunched posture, but she looked at him now, almost as though she were waiting for something more. The silence between them stretched, but Elon knew he had to break it. "What's your name?" he asked. Her response was soft. "I don't have one anymore." The word struck him harder than he had anticipated. She didn't have a name anymore. Was she abandoned? Was she lost? It seemed impossible to imagine anyone not having a name, something to identify them, something that gave them value. But in this moment, she had nothing. And somehow, it broke Elon's heart. He sat next to her on the cold sidewalk, pulling his jacket a little tighter around him. "You do have a name," he said gently. "You just haven't found it yet." The girl stared at him, her expression unreadable. For a long time, it seemed like she wasn't going to respond. But then, she spoke again. "I used to be someone. I used to have a family. But now, it's just me." Her words were like a punch to the gut. They weren't just words, they were a confession of defeat, of loss, of someone who had been cast aside by the very people who should have protected her. The realization hit him hard, this wasn't just a homeless girl, this was someone who had been left behind. Abandoned, perhaps. Or worse, betrayed. Before he could say anything more, a delivery truck pulled up. A bag of food was handed to him, and he passed it to her without hesitation. She accepted it, though she didn't immediately open it. She just stared at the bag for a moment as though she couldn't quite believe it was real. Then, almost instinctively, she opened the bag, revealing a simple meal. She tore into the food like she hadn't eaten in days. She didn't speak for a while, just devouring the meal with a hunger that was almost painful to watch. Elon watched her, his mind racing. This girl wasn't just hungry, she was starving for everything that had been taken from her. For dignity. For connection. For a life that once had meaning. As she finished eating, she looked up at him, and in that moment, something changed. It wasn't just the food. It wasn't even the gesture of kindness. It was the fact that someone, anyone, had noticed her. That someone had cared enough to stop and help. That small act of kindness had shattered the walls she had built around herself. But then, just as quickly as the moment had passed, something clicked in her mind. She looked at Elon, a mixture of disbelief and realization flashing across her face. "Elon Musk?" she asked, her voice a mixture of surprise and recognition. "Is that really you?" Elon froze, his heart skipping a beat. This wasn't just a random encounter after all. She recognized him. But how? What did she know? And why had she seemed so lost when they first met? He stared at her, the weight of the moment settling in. What he had just done was only the beginning. There was much more to her story, much more than he could have anticipated. And that's when he realized, this wasn't just about food. This was something far bigger. The moment of recognition hit Elon like a sudden storm. The girl's voice trembled as she said his name, but it wasn't in awe or admiration, it was something else. Almost as if she had been waiting for this moment, waiting for him to reveal himself. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The hustle of the city continued around them, oblivious to the strange interaction unfolding on the corner of the street. Elon took a slow breath, trying to steady his thoughts. She had recognized him, and now the floodgates of her story were about to open. He looked at her carefully, there was a familiarity in her eyes, something that tugged at his memory, but he couldn't place it. He had helped countless people in his life, but there was something about this girl that felt different. She wasn't just another face in the crowd. He leaned in slightly, his voice soft. "How do you know who I am?" he asked, hoping the answer would shed light on the strange pull he felt toward her. Her gaze shifted, and for a moment, it seemed like she might look away, but she didn't. Instead, she took a deep breath, wiped her face with the back of her hand, and said, "I used to be someone close to you, actually." Elon felt a knot tighten in his chest. The words hung in the air, too heavy to be dismissed. He stared at her, feeling a mix of confusion and curiosity building inside him. "What do you mean?" he asked, unable to mask the intrigue in his voice. She lowered her eyes for a moment, almost as if she was trying to gather the strength to speak. "I don't expect you to remember me," she said quietly. "But I was once a part of your life. I used to work for you, at one of your companies, a long time ago." Elon's mind raced. He had seen thousands of faces in his career, met countless employees, but he couldn't remember her, at least, not immediately. I don't remember you," he confessed, his voice tinged with regret. "What happened? Why are you here, like this?" The girl's expression darkened, and she swallowed hard before speaking again. "It's a long story, Mr. Musk." Her tone was almost bitter now, and Elon could see the pain lingering behind her words. "One day, everything was fine. I had a job, I had a future. I was doing well. But then, one mistake, one decision, everything changed." Her words hung in the air, leaving Elon with more questions than answers. But he could see that there was more to this story than what she was letting on. The hurt in her eyes, the way her shoulders sagged with the weight of her words, this wasn't just about a lost job. This was about something much deeper. He nodded slowly, signaling that he was listening. He could tell she needed time, so he gave her the space to continue, watching as she struggled with the words that came next. I trusted the wrong people, she said, the words coming out in a whisper. I was manipulated, used, and when I was no longer needed, I was tossed aside. No one cared. Not even the company I worked for. I ended up losing everything, and eventually, even myself. Elon felt a pang of sorrow. He had heard stories like this before, people whose lives had been ruined by the greed and indifference of the systems they worked for. But this was different. She wasn't just talking about a career, she was talking about the unraveling of her very identity. She had been chewed up by the system and discarded. He didn't know what to say. He had heard of people losing their jobs, their homes, even their dignity. But this was something deeper. He could see now that the girl before him wasn't just hungry for food, she was hungry for validation, for a chance to rebuild the life that had been taken from her. Do you have family? Friends? Elon asked, wanting to understand the depths of her isolation. She shook her head slowly, her eyes moistening with unshed tears. I had family once, but they turned their backs on me when things got tough. As for friends, they all vanished when I lost my job. I was just disposable to them. Elon's heart clenched. He couldn't fathom the kind of loneliness she must have felt, the weight of rejection that had followed her. It was hard enough to struggle on your own, but when the world you trusted abandons you, it's like being left to drown. Where do you live now? Elon asked softly, the question feeling small compared to the depth of her pain. I don't live anywhere, she replied, her voice breaking. I just survive. Sometimes in shelters. Sometimes on the street. And when people like you stop and offer help, it makes me wonder if maybe I'm worth something again. The vulnerability in her voice hit him hard. Elon had spent his life building companies, creating innovations, reaching for the stars, but here was a girl, sitting on a cold street corner, questioning her own worth, just trying to find a reason to keep going. He wasn't sure what compelled him to do it, but in that moment, he knew something had to change for her. He had the power to make a difference, no, more than that, he wanted to. Tell me more, he said, his voice steady. Tell me what happened, what led to this. And so, she began. Piece by piece, she told her story, unraveling the years of struggles and disappointments, of dreams that had been shattered by betrayal and loss. The more she spoke, the clearer it became, her life had been destroyed by forces outside her control, but it wasn't too late to start again. Elon sat there, absorbing every word, every tear, as he tried to find a way to help her. The question wasn't just how he could help, it was what could really change her life. As he listened, something clicked in his mind. A plan began to form. It wasn't just about giving her a meal or a place to stay, it was about giving her a second chance, a chance to rebuild, to find herself again. He stood up slowly, then turned to face her with a serious expression. There's something I want to offer you, he said. She looked up at him, confused. What do you mean? Elon smiled, a glimmer of hope shining in his eyes. I think I can help you get back on your feet. But it's going to take more than just a handout. It's going to take a commitment from you. Her eyes widened, and she sat up straighter, unsure whether to trust him or doubt his offer. He held her gaze, determined. If you're willing, I can help you make a new start. But it starts with you believing in yourself again. The words Elon had just spoken hung in the air, and for a brief moment, everything seemed to stand still. The girl's wide eyes fixed on him, as though trying to decipher whether his offer was real or just another fleeting gesture from someone who would soon walk away. She opened her mouth to speak but hesitated, unsure whether to believe in what he was suggesting. She started but stopped, her voice trembling. You want to help me? After all I've been through? Elon nodded, his expression serious yet kind. I'm offering you a chance, but it's not going to be easy. You'll need to make a decision. You can keep surviving, day by day, in the shadows of your past. Or you can take this chance to rebuild, starting with the person you were before everything fell apart. The girl looked down at her hands, her fingers trembling as she fidgeted with the empty food container. The weight of his words sank in slowly, but there was something else, something deeper, that Elon hadn't anticipated. A flicker of recognition. A moment where she seemed to recall something or someone she had left behind. Elon leaned in slightly, trying to make himself clear. I'm not offering you just a handout. I'm offering you an opportunity to rediscover who you are. But it requires trust. And hard work. The girl, still sitting on the cold sidewalk, was silent for a long while. Elon wondered if she would reject the idea, as so many others had before. But when she finally looked up, her eyes were filled with something different. Something close to hope, though cautious. I don't even know if I can believe in myself anymore, she said softly. Elon's heart ached at her words. He understood the feeling. He had built everything he had, not from privilege, but from learning how to believe in himself when others doubted him. The thought of someone so young, so full of potential, losing that belief, it was a painful thing to hear. You've been knocked down, Elon said gently, but you haven't been broken. The person you were still exists inside of you. We just have to uncover her. For the first time since they met, the girl let out a shaky sigh, her lips trembling as if the walls she had built up around herself were beginning to crack. But I'm not who I was, she murmured, barely audible. That person is gone. Elon sat beside her, his posture relaxed but his voice firm. No one is ever truly gone. You're just lost right now. Everyone gets lost sometimes, even me. The difference is, some people find their way back. I'm giving you the tools to do that. You just have to take the first step. She stared at him for a long moment, her face unreadable. It wasn't just a matter of trusting Elon, it was about trusting herself again. Trusting that someone, anyone, still saw value in her. It had been so long since she felt seen, heard, or valued. But Elon's presence, his words, were slowly breaking through the walls she had built. I don't know where to start, she admitted, looking down again. Elon smiled, his tone warm. We start with what you already have. And we build from there. The girl gave a small, hesitant nod. It was a beginning, but just that, nothing more, nothing less. A beginning. But that was enough. For Elon, it was the first step in a journey that would take more than money or fame. It was going to take understanding, patience, and a genuine connection, things that couldn't be bought. He wasn't just helping her because it was the right thing to do. He had a feeling that this encounter, this chance meeting, had purpose beyond what he could see right now. You may not see it yet, he continued, his voice softer now, but you have something inside you that no one can take away. It's not gone. It's just hidden. And together, we'll find it. The girl swallowed, her face hardening as if she was preparing for something big, something she had been avoiding for so long. What do you mean, together? She asked, her voice uncertain but curious. Elon hesitated before answering. I mean that I'll help you, not by giving you everything you need, but by guiding you. Showing you what you've been missing in yourself. He paused, letting his words sink in. You'll need to take some risks. Risks that scare you. But I'll be here. Every step of the way. The girl's eyes searched his face, looking for any sign of insincerity. But there was none. Elon Musk wasn't someone who could fake kindness. His words weren't empty, they were backed by the conviction of someone who had taken risks, made mistakes, and fought for every success. He wasn't offering her a dream. He was offering her a chance to make her own dream a reality. I'm scared, she said finally, a mixture of fear and hope in her voice. I've failed so many times already. Elon reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. Failure isn't the end. It's part of the process. It's a lesson, not a verdict. He typed something quickly, then handed her the phone. This is a link to something that can change your life, but only if you're ready. It's your choice. If you want to rebuild, you have to commit. The girl stared at the screen in disbelief. It was a job offer, a chance to work with one of Elon's companies, a way for her to start fresh. But this wasn't just about a paycheck. This was about finding purpose, regaining confidence, and believing in her worth again. I don't know what to say, she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. Elon smiled, his eyes sincere. Say yes. Take that first step. And I promise, you won't regret it. She looked at him, the storm of uncertainty and fear still swirling in her eyes. But for the first time in a long while, there was a glimmer of something else, something that felt like hope. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to rebuild everything she had lost. The girl's fingers hovered over the screen of Elon's phone, her breath shallow as she stared at the job offer. It seemed so unreal, almost like a dream. For someone who had spent so much time just scraping by, never knowing where her next meal would come from, this was more than just a chance at a paycheck. It was an opportunity to rewrite her entire life. Her mind raced. She could see herself in a new life, one where she wasn't a victim of circumstance, where she didn't have to hide from the world in fear of rejection. But doubt crept in. What if she failed again? What if this, like everything else, turned out to be another broken promise? She looked up at Elon, her eyes filled with uncertainty. Why me? Why would you offer me this? She asked quietly, her voice trembling. I don't deserve it. Elon's gaze softened as he watched her. He could see the internal battle playing out on her face. She was torn between hope and fear, fear of the unknown, fear of trusting someone again after everything that had happened to her. It was understandable. Trusting people had clearly been a luxury she could no longer afford. You deserve it because you're human, Elon replied simply. Everyone deserves a chance to rebuild. What matters is not where you've been or what you've lost, it's about who you want to be moving forward. This is your opportunity to show the world who you really are, and more importantly, who you can become. She swallowed hard, the weight of his words pressing down on her. There was a flicker of something in her, something that hadn't been there before. It wasn't certainty, but it was a start. She wasn't sure if she could take the leap, but she felt a strange pull toward the idea of change, of starting anew. The fear was still there, but it was softer, quieter than it had been when they first spoke. I'm scared, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. What if I mess up again? What if I'm not good enough? Elon leaned forward, his eyes intense, but kind. You will mess up. We all do. But what matters is that you keep going. This isn't about being perfect, it's about getting back up every time you fall. It's about learning, growing, and becoming stronger in the process. She let out a breath, her shoulders slumping slightly. The weight of the decision was heavy. But his words resonated with her. She had spent so long feeling invisible, abandoned by the world and by the people who were supposed to care about her. But here was someone, a stranger no less, offering her something more than just food or temporary relief. He was offering her the chance to rebuild her life. I don't know if I can, she said quietly, her voice shaking as she handed the phone back to him. I don't know if I can believe in myself again. Elon didn't take the phone back right away. Instead, he studied her face, his mind working through the complexities of what he was offering. This wasn't just a job offer, it was a lifeline. And he knew it was going to take more than just words to convince her to take it. It would take time, patience, and unwavering belief that she could do it, even when she doubted herself. Then take it one step at a time, he said, his tone calm yet firm. You don't need to believe in yourself right away. Just believe in this moment. Take the first step, and let everything else follow. Sometimes, all we need is that first little spark. After that, it's up to you to keep the flame burning. The girl looked at him, her eyes searching his face for any sign that he was lying, any hint of deception. But there was nothing. Elon wasn't just offering her a chance, he was giving her the space to take it on her own terms. She took a deep breath and then, with a trembling hand, reached out and took the phone back. She tapped the link. Her finger hovered for a moment, uncertain, before finally, she hit accept. Elon watched her, silently acknowledging her courage. It wasn't just about the offer she had just accepted, it was about the first step she had just taken toward reclaiming her life. For the first time in a long while, she had chosen to trust. Trust in him. Trust in herself. And most importantly, trust in the possibility that something better was waiting for her on the other side of fear. I don't know what's next, she said, her voice small, but there was a note of hope in it now. But I'll try. I'll try for something better. Elon smiled, a genuine, soft smile that spoke volumes. That's all anyone can ask for, he said. You've made the hardest choice already, the choice to believe in change. The rest will come when you're ready. For a moment, there was a deep silence between them, a sense of shared understanding. Elon knew that this wasn't the end of her journey, it was just the beginning. And as he stood to leave, he felt a strange satisfaction, knowing that he had played a part in helping someone rediscover their hope. But as he walked away, something about the encounter stayed with him. The girl wasn't just a stranger on the street. She was a person with dreams, with potential, and with a future that was waiting to be reclaimed. And in that moment, Elon realized something else. Helping others wasn't just about giving them opportunities, it was about empowering them to take those opportunities for themselves. As he disappeared into the crowd, he knew he had done something important today. But the most important part? The girl had taken the first step. Now it was up to her to keep walking. The days that followed were a blur for the girl. The moment she had accepted Elon's offer felt like both a victory and a deep plunge into the unknown. She spent the first few days in a fog of doubt, questioning whether she was making the right decision, wondering if this was just another empty promise. Every time she thought about the chance Elon had given her, her fear crept back in, reminding her of all the failures of her past. But there was also a spark inside her that couldn't be ignored. For the first time in a long time, she felt something she hadn't felt in years, hope. Elon's team arranged for her to stay at a small apartment, just for a few weeks, while she figured things out. It wasn't much, but it was a roof over her head. She began to sleep more soundly, the first peaceful sleep she had had in what seemed like ages. But her mind was still restless, always wondering if she had what it took to succeed, to prove that she wasn't the broken person she felt she had become. Then, one morning, as she was walking to the coffee shop to meet with a member of Elon's team, she received an unexpected message. It was from Elon himself. I'm coming by today. I want to discuss the next steps. The message sent a shockwave through her. She had no idea what he meant by next steps. She barely felt prepared to take the first one. What if he expected too much from her? What if she wasn't ready? The weight of it all began to settle over her like a heavy blanket. At the coffee shop, she anxiously waited, watching the clock tick by as she fiddled with the edge of her sleeve. She hadn't seen Elon in person since that day on the street. In the days since, she had only interacted with his team, who seemed to be kind, but distant. They were offering her a chance, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was still just a charity case in their eyes. When the door opened and Elon stepped inside, he walked over to her table, his presence immediately filling the room. His face was as serious as ever, but there was an energy about him that made her sit up straighter. "Good to see you again," he said with a smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "How are you settling in?" "I'm okay," she replied, her voice uncertain. "I'm trying to get used to it." Elon nodded, sitting down across from her. That's good. Change takes time. But I've been thinking. She raised an eyebrow, curiosity taking over the fear that had held her captive for so long. What about? Elon's eyes darkened slightly, and he leaned in closer, his voice lowering. I think it's time to take this a step further. I've been in your shoes before, you've probably heard the stories. The constant cycle of failure and disappointment. You want to give up, but something keeps pulling you forward. But it's not going to be enough to just survive anymore. You need to step into the life you're capable of leading. She felt a chill run down her spine. What do you mean? What are you asking me to do? Elon took a deep breath. I'm not just going to give you a job and send you on your way. That's too easy. What you need is an opportunity to prove yourself, not just to others, but to yourself. I want you to come with me today. You're going to see something you never expected. She hesitated, uncertainty creeping in once again. What do you want me to do? He smiled slightly, a glint of something in his eyes. Trust me. It wasn't the answer she had expected, but it was the answer she needed. She had been given so many chances that turned out to be nothing more than illusions, promises that faded the moment she reached out to grasp them. But something about Elon felt different. His sincerity was tangible, and she couldn't deny that his belief in her was real. He wasn't offering her just a lifeline. He was offering her a future. As she followed him out of the coffee shop, her heart began to race. She had no idea what this next step would entail, but she knew it was a pivotal moment. This was her chance to prove that she could break free from her past. The past that had trapped her in a cycle of survival, a past that had made her feel invisible and unworthy. They got into a car and drove for what felt like hours, though it was only a short distance across town. The car pulled up to a sleek, modern building, one she had seen before but never thought she'd enter. It was the headquarters of one of Elon's many ventures, a place that, to her, seemed worlds away from the street corner she had once sat on. Elon motioned for her to follow him. Welcome to the next step, he said, leading her inside. This is where you'll begin your real work. Her eyes widened as she stepped into the building. The polished floors, the sleek glass walls, the energy in the air, it was a world that felt like it belonged to someone else. But here she was, standing in the heart of it. Take a deep breath, Elon said, his voice steady. This is the start of something big. The girl swallowed hard. But I don't even know what I'm supposed to do here. Elon smiled, his eyes softening. You don't have to know everything right now. What you need to do is start asking questions. Start learning. And if you commit to doing that, I promise you'll discover a new version of yourself. You're not the person you were last week. You're someone who has the power to build something real. She stood there, uncertain, but also excited in a way she had never been before. This was the moment. This was the door opening, and she wasn't about to let it close on her again. Let's get started, Elon said, as they walked deeper into the building. The days that followed were a blur of information, new faces, and the overwhelming sense that she was stepping into a world far bigger than anything she had ever imagined. Elon had opened a door for her, one that led to a life she never thought was possible. But each step she took forward only seemed to bring more questions, more doubts, more uncertainty. She had been given the chance to rebuild, but did she truly deserve it? Elon's team set her up with a mentor, a successful project manager at one of his ventures who would help her navigate her new role. The work was demanding, the pace relentless, and the expectations high. At first, the girl felt completely out of her depth. She was constantly worried about making a mistake, about failing yet again, just like she had in the past. Every time she made a small error, the shame would flood back, memories of being discarded, of feeling like she wasn't good enough. One evening, as she sat alone in the small office space she had been assigned, she stared at the screen in front of her, the blinking cursor taunting her. There was so much to learn, so much she still didn't know. The doubt crept in again. What if she wasn't cut out for this? What if she couldn't keep up with the demands? Her phone buzzed, breaking her concentration. It was a message from Elon. "I'll be there tomorrow. We need to talk." The words sent a ripple of unease through her. A part of her wanted to ignore the message, pretend everything was fine. But deep down, she knew she couldn't. She had come too far, accepted too much to turn back now. The next morning, Elon arrived at her office, his presence commanding yet calm. He had a way of making things feel important without being overwhelming. But today, there was something different about him, a quiet intensity that suggested he had something on his mind. She stood up as he walked in, but before she could say anything, he cut her off with a raised hand. "Sit down," he said. "We need to talk." Her heart skipped a beat. This wasn't a casual check-in, it was something more. Something important. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Elon took a seat across from her, his eyes studying her with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "I've been watching you, and I think you're ready for more. But I'm not going to lie to you, it's going to be a risk. A big one." Her pulse quickened. "What kind of risk?" she asked, though part of her was already bracing for the worst. "The kind of risk that could change everything," Elon replied. "You've made incredible progress, but now it's time to put everything you've learned to the test. This isn't just about a job or a title, it's about trusting yourself when everything else feels uncertain. It's about showing that you've learned to take control of your own future." She looked at him, trying to read his expression. "What are you asking me to do?" He leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers. "I'm offering you a project. A big one. But it's risky. It's not something we can guarantee will succeed. And you'll be responsible for it. If it fails, you'll be the one who carries that burden." Her stomach dropped. She had been so focused on just getting through the day-to-day tasks that she hadn't anticipated something this big. The weight of responsibility felt heavy on her shoulders. The fear was instant. What if she failed? What if everything crumbled around her, and she was the one to blame? Elon could sense her hesitation. "I'm not asking you to do this because I think you're perfect," he said, his voice steady but firm. "I'm asking you to do this because I believe you have what it takes to succeed. I'm offering you a chance to show everyone, yourself included, that you're capable of leading something big." She shook her head slowly. "But what if I'm not? What if I mess it all up?" "That's the risk," Elon replied without flinching. "But you're already doing the hardest part, believing that you can. You've taken the first step. Now you have to trust that the second one will take you to places you never thought possible." Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the desk. The weight of his words settled heavily in her chest. Everything she had worked for, everything she had endured, had led her to this point. The chance to prove herself, not just to others but to the person she was becoming. "I don't know if I'm ready," she whispered, the doubt gnawing at her. "What if I fail and everything falls apart?" Elon sat back, his gaze unwavering. "Failure isn't the end. It's part of the journey. If you succeed, great. If you fail, you learn. But you won't truly know unless you take the leap. And I'm offering you that leap." The girl closed her eyes for a moment, letting the fear wash over her. She had been afraid her entire life, afraid of being judged, afraid of rejection, afraid of not being enough. But in that moment, as she sat across from Elon, she realized something. She had been living in fear of failure for far too long. What if the greatest failure was never trying at all? Her mind raced, but the decision felt clearer now. It wasn't just about succeeding, it was about embracing the unknown, about proving to herself that she had the courage to take risks and face the consequences, whatever they might be. "I'll do it," she said, her voice strong despite the nerves that still fluttered in her stomach. "I'll take the project." Elon's face softened into a proud smile. "Good. That's what I needed to hear." The weight of the decision hadn't fully settled yet, but she felt something shift inside her. This wasn't just about a job, it was about taking control of her own destiny. And no matter what happened next, she was ready to face it head-on. As Elon left the room, he gave her one final piece of advice. "You'll face challenges, and you'll have moments of doubt. But don't forget why you're doing this. You're doing it for yourself. And that's the most powerful reason of all." The girl sat back in her chair, staring at the screen in front of her. She didn't know what would happen next. But for the first time in a long time, she was willing to risk it all to find out. The days that followed her decision were filled with a whirlwind of activity. The girl had thrown herself into the project, her mind focused on every detail, every challenge that came her way. Elon's faith in her was still fresh in her mind, and it kept her going during the moments when self-doubt threatened to creep in. But even with all the effort she poured into the work, there was still a nagging fear that lingered. What if she wasn't enough? What if the project failed? As she walked through the sleek offices, overseeing her team and working on the finer details of the project, she found herself constantly second-guessing her decisions. She had a team now, people who were depending on her, who were watching her every move. And that pressure was overwhelming. She had never been in a position like this before. The stakes felt higher than they had ever been in her life. One morning, after an exhausting few days of meetings, Elon called her into his office. She had been bracing herself for this moment, knowing that he would check in on her progress. But as she entered his office, she noticed something in his demeanor that caught her off guard. He wasn't his usual confident self. There was an intensity in his eyes, a sense of urgency she hadn't expected. "Sit down," Elon said, his voice low but firm. She sat across from him, her heart racing. "We need to talk about the project." Her stomach turned. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice betraying the anxiety she felt. Elon studied her for a moment, as though weighing his words carefully. "The project is at a critical point. We've hit a snag. Something that could derail everything we've worked for. But it's not an insurmountable challenge. The problem is, it's going to take someone with real vision to solve it. And that someone is you." She froze, her mind racing to catch up. "What do you mean? What happened?" Elon took a deep breath. "There's been a mistake in the logistics department. A major one. If we don't fix it by the end of this week, we'll lose the support we need for the project to continue. It's not something we can just sweep under the rug. But I believe you can turn this around. You have the vision to see it from a different angle, to find a solution where others might give up." She stared at him, a mix of disbelief and panic flooding her. "But how can I fix this? I don't even know where to begin. I don't have the experience." Elon's gaze softened slightly, though his tone remained serious. "That's where you've been wrong all along. You think you need to have experience to succeed. But what you really need is the willingness to dive in head first, to trust that you have the capacity to solve problems, even when they seem impossible. That's the quality I see in you." The weight of his words hit her harder than anything he had said before. She had been so consumed with doubt and fear, with the belief that she was an imposter in this world of high-stakes business, that she had forgotten what had gotten her this far. She had started with nothing, no job, no stability, no confidence. But she had earned this chance. And now, it was time to prove to herself that she deserved it. Taking a deep breath, she stood up from the chair, her mind spinning with ideas. She didn't have all the answers, but she knew that she wasn't going to let this slip away. Not after everything she had been through. Not after everything Elon had invested in her. "I'll figure it out," she said with determination, her voice stronger than it had been in days. I don't know how, but I'll make it work. Elon's eyes shone with approval. That's what I wanted to hear. You're not here to play it safe. You're here to change things. As she walked out of Elon's office, her mind was a whirl of possibilities. The pressure was immense. The weight of the responsibility was more than she had ever felt, but for the first time, it didn't feel like a burden, it felt like a challenge. And she was ready for it. She was no longer the girl who had sat alone on the cold street corner, unsure of her worth. She had come so far, and now, she was going to prove to herself that she could succeed on her own terms. That night, as she sat in her office, working through the logistics problem, she felt something shift inside her. It wasn't just the answer to the problem, it was the realization that she wasn't going to let fear hold her back anymore. She was no longer afraid of failing. What terrified her now was the thought of not giving it her all, of not showing up for herself when it mattered most. The next morning, she called her team into the office. She laid out the issue and her proposed solution, explaining the steps they would need to take to fix the error. They listened, and for the first time, she saw them not as subordinates, but as allies. She was leading them, not with perfection, but with the belief that they could solve this together. And as she spoke, she could see the spark of confidence in their eyes, too. She was no longer just part of the team. She was the one in charge. Over the next few days, they worked tirelessly, implementing the new plan. And by the end of the week, they had done it. The project was back on track. Not only had they fixed the issue, but they had done it in a way that made the project even stronger. It wasn't just a victory for the company, it was a victory for her. She had faced the challenge head-on, and she had come out on top. Elon was right. She had what it took. She wasn't the person she had been when she first met him. She was someone who had earned the right to lead, to take risks, and to rise above the obstacles in her way. When she met with Elon later that day, he didn't say much. He simply nodded, a proud smile on his face. "I knew you could do it," he said. And in that moment, she realized that the real victory wasn't just solving the problem, it was the transformation that had happened inside her. She had faced her fear, taken the leap, and found that she was capable of so much more than she had ever thought possible. The success of the project had been a victory for the girl, a moment that proved her strength and resilience. But as time passed, she began to feel the weight of the next challenge creeping closer. The project was still ongoing, and now the stakes were higher than ever. She had solved the logistics issue, yes, but that was just one piece of a much bigger puzzle. There were still deadlines to meet, contracts to negotiate, and the growing expectation that she would continue to perform at this high level. Elon's faith in her had changed everything, but with that faith came an undeniable pressure. She wasn't just part of the team anymore, she was leading it. And the reality of leadership was starting to set in. Every decision she made now carried the potential to impact not just the project, but the lives of the people depending on it, including her own. One afternoon, as she sat at her desk reviewing the latest project report, she received an unexpected message from Elon. The message was simple, but it sent a jolt of anxiety through her. "Meet me in the conference room. We need to talk about the next phase." Her hands trembled slightly as she closed the report and stood up. This was it, the moment she had been preparing for, but had secretly feared. What if she wasn't ready for the next phase? What if this was where she failed? Her mind raced with doubts, but she pushed them aside. There was no room for doubt now. She had to face whatever came next. When she entered the conference room, Elon was already there, standing by the large table, his arms crossed as he looked out the window. The atmosphere felt different today, tense, charged. Elon didn't turn to face her right away, and she could sense something important was on the horizon. He finally turned, his gaze sharp. "I've been thinking a lot about where you're headed with this project, and where I want you to go with it. You've proven you can handle the pressure, but now it's time to prove something even bigger." Her heart skipped a beat. She tried to steady her breath as she waited for him to continue. This next phase is critical, Elon continued. It involves more than just technical skills. We're talking about a shift in company strategy. A risky move that could either make us or break us. And I want you to lead it. The weight of his words hit her like a punch to the stomach. This wasn't just about managing a team anymore. It wasn't about simply getting things done. This was about making a decision that could define the future of the company, and potentially her future. "You're asking me to make decisions that could affect everyone?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Elon nodded. "Exactly. You're not just leading a team anymore, you're leading a vision. You've earned this role. I believe you have the foresight to make the right call." She looked at him, her mind racing. This wasn't the kind of challenge she had prepared for. She had thought that once the project was back on track, she could coast for a while. But this was different. This was her chance to shape something bigger, something that would have a lasting impact. But could she handle it? Was she truly capable of making decisions that could change everything? The fear that had been lurking in the back of her mind, the fear that had almost consumed her during the early days of this journey, suddenly resurfaced. She had been given so much, and now it felt like all of it could come crashing down with a single misstep. Elon seemed to sense her hesitation. "You don't have to have all the answers right now. No one does. But I need to know you're ready to take this on." The pressure of his gaze was intense, but it wasn't judgmental. It was encouraging. He was pushing her to rise to the occasion, to trust in herself the way he trusted her. "I don't know if I am," she said honestly, her voice trembling slightly. "This is a huge responsibility. What if I make the wrong call? What if I'm not enough?" Elon stepped closer, his expression softening. "The only wrong call is not making one. Don't let fear hold you back. You've already proven that you can take on the impossible. And that's why I believe in you." For a moment, all she could do was stare at him, processing his words. She had been so afraid of failure that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to be empowered. In those early days, when she had been starving, not just for food, but for a reason to believe in herself, she had felt completely powerless. But now, with Elon's unwavering belief in her and her own strength slowly coming back, she realized something important: this fear wasn't something to run from. It was something to face. She took a deep breath, her mind clearer now than it had ever been. She had been given an opportunity to not just prove herself to others, but to prove to herself that she was capable of greatness. She had come too far to back down now. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady and full of conviction. Elon smiled, his face breaking into a grin. "I knew you would be. This is your moment. Don't waste it." And with that, the weight of the decision settled over her, but it no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a challenge she was ready to meet head-on. The final test was not just about the project, it was about everything she had learned, every fear she had overcome, and every decision she had made to get here. This was her chance to prove that she had what it took to lead, to take risks, and to change not only her life but the lives of those around her. And as the days passed and the project moved into its next phase, she knew that no matter what happened, she had already won. Because the true test had never been about success or failure, it had always been about having the courage to try. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. The project, under her leadership, began to evolve in ways she had never expected. The risks she had taken, the tough decisions she had made, slowly began to pay off. But with every victory came a new set of challenges. Each day brought something unexpected, new problems to solve, new questions to answer. The pressure was relentless, but as time went on, she realized something powerful: she wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. It wasn't easy, though. There were moments when she doubted herself, moments when the weight of the decisions she had made seemed unbearable. But each time she faltered, she thought back to Elon's words, back to the trust he had placed in her when no one else had. She remembered the girl who had sat on that cold sidewalk, questioning her worth, and how far she had come since then. She was no longer afraid of failing. In fact, failure no longer seemed like something to avoid, it was simply a part of the process, a step toward growth. As the project neared its final stages, the pressure reached a new peak. This was the moment when everything would either come together or fall apart. She had made it this far, but there was still so much riding on her choices. The future of the company, the team, even her own future, rested on the decisions she made in these final days. One evening, after a long day of meetings and strategic planning, she found herself sitting alone in her office, staring at the vast city skyline outside her window. She had done it. She had led the team through some of the most difficult challenges, and now, she was on the brink of success. But what was success really? Was it about the project, the numbers, the outcome? Or was it about the journey, about the lessons learned along the way? In that quiet moment, she realized that her biggest victory wasn't the project, the recognition, or even the confidence she had gained. Her greatest victory was the transformation she had gone through. She had started this journey as someone who felt broken, lost, and unsure of her worth. And now, she was someone who believed in herself, not because of her success, but because she had finally found the strength to take control of her own life. Just then, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Elon. "I'm proud of you. You've done something incredible, but the real success is the person you've become." The message hit her harder than she expected. She had done it. She had proven to herself that she was capable of far more than she had ever imagined. But it wasn't just about the work, it was about who she had become in the process. The next morning, the final phase of the project went live. The team celebrated, and the results exceeded everyone's expectations. The success of the project was undeniable, but the girl knew that it wasn't just the outcome that mattered, it was the journey that had shaped her into the leader she had become. Later that day, Elon called her into his office. She was no longer nervous, she knew what he was going to say, but it didn't make the moment any less impactful. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with pride. "This project is a success, but it's more than that. You've transformed. You've become a leader, not just of the team, but of yourself. That's the greatest success." She smiled, a sense of peace settling over her. It wasn't the recognition or the praise that mattered most. It was the lesson she had learned along the way. True success is found not in external accomplishments, but in the growth we experience within ourselves. As she walked out of Elon's office, a deep sense of gratitude filled her. She had come so far, far beyond what she had ever thought possible. She had faced her fears, taken risks, and learned that failure was just another step on the path to success. But most importantly, she had learned to believe in herself. She wasn't the girl who had once sat hungry and invisible on the streets. She was a leader. She was someone who had taken control of her own destiny. And that, she realized, was the most powerful thing of all. The lesson she had learned was simple but profound: life isn't about waiting for opportunities to come to you. It's about creating your own opportunities, stepping up to the challenges, and believing that you are worthy of every success, no matter how big or small. And as she looked out the window, watching the city unfold before her, she knew one thing for sure: this was only the beginning. The future was hers to create.